this is Erica Bunker and welcome to my YouTube. Today I'm going to show you how I created this fabulous jumpsuit using two different commercial patterns that I pattern hacked together to get my designer look. Stay tuned. My inspiration jumpsuit comes from designer Joanna Ortiz. It has a strapless bodice, a sweetheart neckline, it's knotted at the bust, it has a high nipped-in waist, pleated wide leg pants, and a center back lap zipper. For my bodice pattern, I'm using Vogue pattern 8849, which is currently out of print. The pattern pieces I'm using are the bodice front, the bodice side front, and the bodice back. We're going to cut these out and modify. For the waistband and the pants, I will be using McCall's 7167. The pattern pieces I'll be using are the front waistband, the back waistband, the pants front, and the pants back. Now that we've cut out all of our pattern pieces, we're going to go ahead and begin to modify them. The first step that I'm doing is you have to determine where the bodice will meet the waistband. And in doing this, note on here the placement of the waistline. The waistline is right here on the bodice front pattern. Notice right here on the waistband pattern. I simply line up the center. I match the waistline indicating marks on both patterns. And this is where your bodice should match your waistband. Now we have to remember that in this pattern, the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance has already been included. Now when you cut this one off, you're going to have to go back in and add the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. For my particular pattern, I needed to add an additional inch for the length and then add the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So my pattern would be cut off at this point right here. In order to preserve my pattern pieces for the next time I plan to use them, I'm going to go ahead and trace the pattern out on tracing paper. I have gone ahead and used pattern weights. Well, basically they're large washers that you can get from any home improvement store to weigh down the pattern piece. I'm going to use the tracing wheel and trace around it onto the tracing paper. Make sure to include all pattern markings. Using my rotary cutter, I'm going to go ahead and cut around the perforated edge that was created with my tracing wheel. Using a pattern notcher, or you can use scissors, go ahead and mark your notches. And any other pattern markings. Okay, now we are going to create our cutout in the center front of the front bodice piece. First, we are going to measure from the bottom edge over 5/8 of an inch for the seam allowance. Make a little mark right there to indicate it. Okay, next, I decided that I wanted my cutout to be as high as 2 inches in the center front. So we're now going to make a marking 2 inches up. And we're using your ruler, we're going to draw a line connecting that 2-inch mark to the 5/8 of an inch mark. Okay, and this is where the cutout will be, but we need to go ahead and add a seam allowance to that. I decided that since we're going to sew the front bodice piece to the lining piece, that we want this seam allowance to be as small as possible. So I'm going to make mine 3/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to write that on here so I won't forget. And we can just go ahead and trim this part off. And let's make some notations on here that this is going on the fold. And you also want to cut 1 in fabric and 1 in lining. And just so we won't forget what it is, this is the bodice front. And just like we traced this pattern piece out and cut it off for the new measurements, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing with the bodice side front and the bodice back. And then we'll be ready for the waistband. In order to create the front ties, now this part is purely decorative, so it's completely optional on whether you want to omit this or keep it in. What I did was I created the tie by going up 2 inches from the bottom and down 2 inches from the top. And the top part of the piece, and I am using the front bodice piece to create this. I went over 16 inches from the top, 16.5 inches from the bottom, and basically then I just took a ruler and just connected the lines and cut that piece out. And the pattern piece looks like this. And how it's sewn is you would lay the wrong side of the bodice overlay on top of the right side of the bodice front piece, baste that together, and then you would connect it to the side bodice front piece, and it would be sandwiched in between the front bodice like that. Pretty simple. And this is how it looks when it's all sewn together. As you see right there, it's all nicely tucked in between the side bodice front and the front bodice piece. And like I said, this part is purely decorative, and you would just tie this however way you wanted to tie it, and leave that part right there. And on the inside, it's all nice and clean with the lining. There's nothing there. And I was going to talk a little bit more about a bra situation for this. I decided to use bra cups, so I wouldn't have to be worried about a bra. And these are the ones that I used. These are the Dritz molded foam bra cups, and as you see right there, you can just buy them in your own bra size and just them. And I sewed mine onto the lining fabric, and I just connected them with a zigzag stitch on the inside. And if you're wondering, well, how would I know how to place these or where to place them? Well, once you sew the lining fabric to the fashion fabric, before you connect it to the waistband, all you have to do is just kind of try it on to yourself and pin it in place. Or if you have a dress form, you can put it on a dress form and put them there. If you used a pattern similar to the one that I use that has the custom cup sizes, you can kind of feel where they belong and you just sew them into place. Another change I made to the original pattern was to extend the back openings for a lapped zipper. And the reason that I chose a lap zipper is because I felt that a lapped zipper would give more stability than a normal invisible zipper closure. And usually, a lot of times I will default to an exposed metal zipper, but sometimes you don't necessarily want the teeth showing. You want to just keep the print in place. So I felt that for this particular application, a lap zipper would work. And this is how I went about that. Here is the original back bodice piece. And here is my modified version. As you see, I've already gone ahead and made my modifications to shorten it. And I added 3/8 of an inch to the seam allowance on the back side, on the center back side. And the reason I added 3/8 because the seam allowance is already 5/8 of an inch. And what you want when you're creating a lap zipper, you need to have 1 inch seam allowances on both sides. And I will go ahead on another tutorial and show how I create lap zipper insertions. Okay, next we're going to go ahead and sew the bodice together. First, you are going to go ahead and make narrow hems on the ties, and we're going to sew them to the bodice front with wrong side of the tie to right side of the bodice front. Okay, we matched up the notches on both sides and we've sewn in the ties. Next, we're going to go ahead and sew in the bodice sides. We're going to go ahead and match up the notches and clip wherever you feel you need to clip. Now that we have sewn the lining together, at this point in your commercial pattern instructions, you will be suggested to bone your bodice. And this is the type of boning that I use. Okay, with right sides together, make sure you pin your lining to your fabric and match at the seams and at the center front. And once you stitch across the top, you're going to open it up and understitch the lining. Okay, next we are going to sew the V at the center front bottom of the bodice. That's going to be at the top of the cutout. And we're going to start from this point to the center front to that point. Okay, now that we have stitched that, I'm going to open it up and understitch it as far as I can to the center and then turn it over and do the other side. Okay, now that we've stitched the part at the bottom and understitched it, we're going to turn the whole thing back out. We're going to go ahead and take it over to the ironing board and give it a good pressing, and then we'll be ready to attach it to the waistband. Now that we have the waistband pinned to the bodice on both sides, all the seams are matching, we're going to go ahead and sew that together. Now that the waistband has been sewn on, you're going to understitch it, give it a good pressing, and follow the instructions and attach it to the pants. And put your zipper in, hem the pants, and then you'll be done. Thank you so much for watching.